In the night sky of the Great Patriotic War, real miracles happened. Fragile girls in old training planes scared the German army, which had been unbeatable until then. The enemies called them nightwitches, and this nickname became a symbol of female courage. During the 4 years of war, they flew 24,000 combat missions, proving to the whole world that the sky can belong to those who are willing to fight for it. Their story is about how ordinary Soviet girls became legends of world aviation. If you were impressed by the story of the nightwitches, be sure to subscribe to our channel, where you will find many more amazing stories about the heroes of the Great Patriotic War. And in the comments, let's discuss a controversial question. Was it justified to send very young girls, many of whom were not even 20 years old, to the front? Could they have been more useful behind the lines? Or was their heroic contribution to victory truly irreplaceable? Share your opinion. On March 28, 1912, a girl was born in Moscow who was destined to change the course of the Great Patriotic War. Marina Mikhailovna Raskova. This name will go down in history as a symbol of female courage in the sky. But back then, at the beginning of the 20th century, no one could have imagined that this fragile girl would become the founder of legendary women's air regiments. From childhood, Marina was drawn to the sky. After graduating from the conservatory with a degree in vocal music, she surprised everyone by enrolling in the Leningrad Institute of Civil Air Fleet Engineers. Music took a back seat. The girl was captivated by aviation. In 1933, Raskova received her pilot's license, and a year later, she became a navigator. Her name became famous throughout the country in 1938. Marina, as part of a female crew on the Rodina aircraft, made a non-stop flight from Moscow to the Far East. But fate had a test in store for her. During the flight, the navigator's cabin was damaged, and Raskova was forced to parachute into the taiga. She spent 10 days alone in the wilderness, feeding on berries and roots, until she was found by search parties. This feat earned Raskova the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. She became the first woman to receive this highest award. Fame opened the doors to the highest echelons of power for her. Raskova knew Stalin personally and enjoyed his trust. It was this circumstance that would allow her to achieve the impossible in the future. When war broke out on June 22, 1941, thousands of Soviet women appealed to the authorities to send them to the front. Most were refused. War was considered a man's business. But Raskova thought differently. She understood that female pilots could be of great benefit to the front. In October 1941, when the Germans were at the gates of Moscow, Marina Raskova came to see Stalin with a bold proposal. She asked for permission to form women's aviation regiments. The idea seemed crazy. Never in the history of mankind had women participated in air combat on such a scale. Stalin was silent for a long time, considering the proposal. The situation at the front was critical, and any reserves were needed. Finally, he gave his consent. The order to form 3 women's air regiments was signed. Raskova was given the rank of major and unlimited authority to select and train female pilots. Thus began a story that would go down in military history as the Nightwitches. It is a story of how fragile girls became a nightmare for the invincible Wehrmacht. News of the formation of women's air regiments spread across the country like wildfire. Komsomol organizations, flying clubs, flight schools, everywhere, a real mobilization began. Hundreds of female aviators responded to Raskova's call. Many already had solid flying experience, worked as instructors in flying clubs, or served in civil aviation. The selection process was brutal. They weren't just looking for girls who could fly, but real aces. They had to be between 17 and 25 years old, in excellent health, and mentally strong. Only the best were selected from thousands of applicants. Each of them understood that death or glory awaited them. In November 1941, intensive training courses began in Engels. The program was designed to last several months, but time was running out. The front needed reinforcements. The girls studied 18 hours a day, learning flight theory, mechanics, shooting, and bomb throwing. The conditions were Spartan. They lived in unheated barracks and slept on hard bunks. They were given men's uniforms which were worn out. The shirts hung loosely, and the boots were several sizes too big for their feet. They had to pad them with rags and newspapers, but no one complained. Everyone understood the importance of the moment. Marina Raskova personally supervised the training. She was everywhere, at lectures, on flights, in the barracks. Her energy and belief in success were contagious. Raskova knew how to find an approach to each girl, support them in difficult moments, and point out mistakes without humiliating them. The plan was to create 3 regiments with different specializations. The 586th Fighter Aviation Regiment was to fight German aces in aerial duels. The 587th Bomber Regiment was tasked with striking enemy targets during the day, and the 588th Night Bomber Regiment was intended for special operations under the cover of darkness. It was the latter regiment that would become more famous than the others. It was its female pilots who would be nicknamed nightwitches by the Germans. But for now, they were just girls who were stubbornly mastering the intricacies of military affairs. The first flights showed that women were in no way inferior to men in flying skills. Moreover, they proved to be more accurate, more disciplined, and more attentive to detail. What seemed to be a disadvantage, less physical strength, was compensated for by better coordination and intuition. By the spring of 1942, training was complete. The regiments received their battle flags and aircraft. The moment of truth had arrived. The girls were sent to the front to prove that the sky did not belong only to men. Among the selected pilots, 29-year-old Evdokia Bershanskaya stood out. An experienced pilot with thousands of hours of flight time, she had already commanded a women's flight squadron at the Bataysk Aviation School. When Raskova was looking for a commander for the most unusual regiment, a night bomber squadron, the choice fell on her. Bershanskaya was born in 1913 in a small village in the Kuban region. From childhood, the girl dreamed of the sky. At the age of 20, she enrolled in the Bataysk Flight School and quickly demonstrated outstanding abilities. She was particularly good at night flights, which are the most difficult and dangerous. While other pilots preferred to fly during the day, Evdokia chose the darkness. Her flying skills were impeccable. Colleagues said that Bershanskaya felt the plane as an extension of her own body. She could make a blind landing in any weather, navigate without instruments, and fly in conditions when others did not even dare to take off. It was these qualities that made her the ideal candidate for the position of commander of a night regiment. Upon receiving her appointment, Bershanskaya threw herself into her work. She was not just going to lead the regiment, but also had to develop new tactics for night bombing. No one had ever used light aircraft for night attacks on such a scale before. Everything had to be invented from scratch. The regiment was unofficially nicknamed Duncan's Regiment. a playful name given to the unit by the frontline soldiers after their commander. Bershanskaya was not offended. On the contrary, she was proud that her girls had become one family. The regiment was filled with an atmosphere of mutual assistance and support, which was created by the commander herself. Evdokia Davidovna possessed a rare gift, the ability to inspire people. Her calmness and confidence were passed on to her subordinates. Before each flight, she personally briefed the crews, explained the task, and encouraged the girls. After their return, she always listened to their reports, analyzed mistakes, and praised them for their successes. Discipline in the regiment was iron, but without drill and shouting. Bershanskaya achieved results by personal example. She was the first to take to the sky and the last to return to base. She never sent her subordinates where she would not dare to fly herself. Such leadership earned the girls sincere respect and willingness to follow their commander through fire and water. Under Bershanskaya's leadership, the regiment became a well-oiled machine. Every pilot knew her place. Every technician understood the importance of her work. It was not just a military unit. It was a family united by a common goal and boundless trust in their commander. When the regiment went to the front, Bershanskaya was ready to prove that her girls were capable of great things. She did not yet know that soon her name would be known throughout the world, and Duncan's regiment would go down in history as the most effective night formation of the war. On May 23, 1942, the 588th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment arrived at the Southern Front. 115 girls aged 17 to 25 were preparing for their baptism of fire. Many had never heard the whistle of bullets or the roar of explosions. The harsh reality of war awaited them. The first thing that struck the veteran frontline soldiers was the youth of the new recruits. The girls looked like schoolgirls dressed in military uniforms. Huge gymnastic shirts, loose boots, and caps that were too big all gave the regiment a frivolous appearance. Experienced pilots shook their heads. Were these little ones really going to fight? Skepticism grew when the soldiers saw the regiment's equipment. Instead of modern combat vehicles, the girls were given U-2 training aircraft, renamed Po-2 in honor of their designer, Polikarpov. These plywood biplanes from the 1920s looked like museum exhibits against the backdrop of menacing fighters and bombers. The first weeks at the front were a real test. The girls learned to live in dugouts, sleep to the sound of artillery fire, and eat from soldiers' mess kits. Many encountered such hardships for the first time. There was a shortage of everything, from warm clothing to feminine hygiene products. Night flights in combat conditions were particularly difficult. It was one thing to fly training missions in peaceful skies, but quite another to make your way to your target under anti-aircraft fire. The first combat missions were unsuccessful. The girls got lost in the darkness, missed their targets, and returned without results. At first, German soldiers did not even take their new enemies seriously. When female pilots were captured, the Nazis were surprised. Was the USSR really so depleted that it was sending children into battle? They did not yet know the price they would pay for this contempt. Bershanskaya understood that it would take time for the regiment to gain combat experience. She started with simple tasks: reconnaissance, delivering mail, and communicating with partisans. Gradually, the girls got used to life on the front lines, familiarized themselves with the terrain, and studied the enemy's habits. The first success came in early June. A squadron of female pilots under the command of Senior Lieutenant Popova managed to accurately bomb a German ammunition depot. The explosion was visible for several kilometers. This was a turning point. The girls believed in their strength, and the front command began to seriously consider the capabilities of the women's regiment. With each passing day, the pilots' combat skills grew. They studied enemy tactics, found weak spots in their defenses, and perfected their own techniques. What at first seemed like a disadvantage, light, slow-flying aircraft, turned out to be an advantage in night operations. By the end of the summer of 1942, the regiment had become a real combat unit. The novice girls had turned into experienced warriors. Soon the whole world would know them by the name their enemies had given them, the nightwitches. The Po-2 aircraft on which the nightwitches were to fight was a real anachronism compared to modern aviation. Created in the late 1920s as a training aircraft, it seemed helpless against the formidable technology of the Luftwaffe. Its maximum speed was only 120 kilometers per hour. Its flight altitude was no more than 3,000 meters, and it had virtually no weapons. The biplane was a wooden frame covered with fabric. There was no armor, no protection from bullets or shrapnel. The cockpit could only accommodate two people, the pilot and the navigator. There were very few instruments, an altimeter, a compass, and a speed indicator. There was no radio communication. Navigation was carried out using a map and a stopwatch. The bomb load was also laughable by military standards, only 200 kilograms. 4 bombs weighing 50 kilograms each, or 8 smaller shells were suspended under the wings. For comparison, the German Heinkel He-111 bomber carried up to 3 tons of bombs. But the Po-2 also had some unexpected advantages. The light and slow-flying aircraft could take off and land on almost any surface. It did not need concrete runways. A flat meadow or dirt road was sufficient. This allowed it to be based close to the front line and respond quickly to changes in the situation. The aircraft's main advantage was its stealth. Its wooden and fabric construction reflected almost no radio waves, making the Po-2 virtually invisible to German radar. Its low speed also played into its hands. Modern fighters could not effectively attack such a slow target without risking going into a tailspin themselves. The pilots quickly mastered all the intricacies of flying the Sky Slowpoke. They learned to use every feature of the aircraft. Its low flight altitude allowed it to hide behind the terrain and sneak up on targets unnoticed. Its quiet operation made it possible to take the enemy by surprise. The simplicity of the design played a special role. The Po-2 was so unpretentious that it could be repaired right in the field. Holes in the fabric were patched with ordinary adhesive tape, and damaged struts were replaced with materials at hand. Female technicians mastered all the secrets of maintenance and could repair the aircraft literally on their knees. Over time, the design was improved. A machine gun was added for the navigator, a primitive bomb sight was installed, and visibility from the cockpit was improved. But the main qualities of the aircraft remained unchanged: simplicity, reliability, and unpretentiousness. It was on these modest aircraft that the women would make thousands of combat sorties. The Po-2 became a symbol of the nightwitches and went down in history as the most effective light bomber of the war. Enemies would shudder at the distinctive sound of its engine echoing in the night. The Germans nicknamed the Po-2 "sewing machine" because of the characteristic rattling sound of its engine. But for the Soviet female pilots, it was a loyal combat companion that never let them down in the most critical moments. The tactics developed by the pilots of the 588th Regiment were unprecedented in world military practice. Traditional methods of night bombing involved the use of heavy aircraft at high altitudes. The girls took a different approach. They turned the night into their ally, and the weakness of the aircraft into their strength. Operations began at nightfall. While the daytime Air Force rested, preparing for morning sorties, the night witches got to work. The schedule was grueling, up to 15 combat sorties per night. Between sorties, there were only 5 to 8 minutes to refuel and load new bombs. The pilots learned to use every feature of their aircraft. The Po-2 flew so low that it was not detected by German radar. The flight altitude rarely exceeded 600 meters, and the girls often flew just above the treetops. This required virtuoso skill, but it guaranteed the surprise of the attack. The main trump card was the unique tactic of silent gliding. A few kilometers before the target, the pilot would turn off the engine. The plane glided silently toward the target, using only the force of gravity. In the silence of the night, only the slight rustle of air flowing over the fabric wings could be heard. This sound filled the Germans with mystical terror. We were used to the roar of fighter planes, so we couldn't figure out where this mysterious noise in the sky was coming from. We called it the Witch's Broom. That's how the regiment got its legendary nickname. The bombing accuracy was amazing. When planning the target, the pilot could adjust the direction of the attack until the last second. The bombs were dropped from a height of 300 to 400 meters, which ensured high accuracy. After the bombing, the engine was immediately turned on, and the plane disappeared into the darkness before the enemy had time to react. German anti-aircraft gunners were powerless against such tactics. Their guns could not aim at the silently gliding targets. And when the pilots started their engines and flew away, it was too late to shoot. Searchlights also proved ineffective. The Po-2 was too small and quickly disappeared from the cones of light. Navigation at night was particularly difficult. The girls navigated by the stars, the characteristic bends of rivers, and the outlines of forests. Each pilot studied her section of the front in minute detail. They knew every village, every ravine, every road within a radius of hundreds of kilometers. The psychological effect of the night witches exceeded the material damage. German soldiers could not sleep peacefully, knowing that death could fall from the sky at any moment. They were afraid to light fires, turn on lights, or even smoke in the dark. Any spark instantly attracted the attention of Soviet pilots. This is how a unique tactic of night terror was developed, which would make the night witches legendary. Ordinary girls in outdated aircraft became a nightmare for one of the best armies in the world. On August 6, 1942, an entry appeared in the diary of a soldier of the 105th Infantry Regiment of the Wehrmacht that would go down in history. The Russians are using aircraft against us that fly at night and approach our positions almost silently. We call their pilots night witches. Thus was born the nickname that would make Soviet female pilots famous throughout the world. German soldiers were superstitious people. Many believed in various omens, wore amulets, and consulted astrologers. The war on the Eastern Front already seemed to them a mystical confrontation with the mysterious Russian soul. The appearance of silent night ghosts in the sky reinforced these feelings many times over. The first clashes with Soviet female pilots gave rise to the most incredible rumors in the enemy camp. The Nazis were convinced that they were not fighting ordinary women, but some kind of supernatural beings. They said that the Russians had released the most desperate female criminals from prison and pumped them full of special drugs that turned them into fearless killers. The characteristic sound of the gliding aircraft was particularly terrifying. In the silence of the night, the rustling of air under the wings of the Po-2 really did sound like the sweeping of brooms. German soldiers, who had grown up on the fairy tales of the Brothers Grimm, immediately drew parallels with witches flying through the night on their broomsticks. The fear was intensified by the fact that the attacks took place at minimum altitude. The pilots literally flew over the heads of their enemies, who could see the silhouettes of the aircraft against the starry sky. In the darkness, the Po-2s looked like giant black birds or mythical creatures. The Wehrmacht command tried to combat the panic. Instructions were issued explaining the Russians' tactics. Officers convinced the soldiers that they were fighting ordinary people in outdated aircraft, but the psychological effect had already been achieved. The seeds of fear had sprouted in the souls of the Nazis. The German name Nachthexen quickly spread across the front. The night witches were talked about in the trenches, headquarters, and field hospitals. They were feared by anti-aircraft gunners, hated by infantrymen, and studied by pilots. Every German soldier knew that when darkness fell, the sky belonged to the Russian witches. Goebbels's propaganda tried to use this image for its own purposes. German leaflets depicted Soviet female pilots as creatures from hell sent by the Bolsheviks to terrify Aryan warriors. But this tactic backfired on its creators. The image of the night witches only reinforced the soldiers' mystical fear. The irony of fate was that the nickname given by their enemies appealed to the female pilots themselves. The girls were proud that the hitherto invincible German soldiers feared them. Night witches became an honorary title, a symbol of courage and bravery. Soviet propaganda picked up on the apt name. Newspapers, radio, and newsreels told stories of the exploits of the night witches. The image of fragile girls striking terror into the enemy inspired the entire nation. Thus, a chance nickname became a legend. The female pilots themselves treated their grim fame with humor. They joked that they really did practice witchcraft, turning German warehouses into piles of ashes and enemy soldiers into cowards. The magic of the night witches proved stronger than any weapon. In the fall of 1942, one of the largest battles of the Great Patriotic War began. The Battle of the Caucasus. The German army was pushing toward the oil fields of Grozny and Baku, while Soviet troops were putting up desperate resistance. In this battle, the night witches showed for the first time what they were capable of in large-scale operations. The mountainous terrain of the Caucasus created special conditions for light aircraft. The Po-2 could fly between peaks, using gorges as natural corridors for a stealthy approach to targets. German radars, designed to detect targets over flat terrain, were powerless in the mountains. The first serious operation was a strike against German communications in the Mozdok area. The Nazis stretched their supply lines for hundreds of kilometers along mountain roads. These narrow, winding roads became ideal targets for night bombers. The pilots learned to use the features of the mountainous terrain to their advantage. They approached their targets flying along the gorges, appearing from behind rocky ridges like ghosts. The sound of their engines echoed off the stone walls, and the Germans could not determine where the attack was coming from. Strikes on mountain passes proved particularly effective. The narrow roads made it impossible for convoys to maneuver. A precisely dropped bomb could block a pass for several days. German sappers worked around the clock to clear the debris, while the night witches prepared a new strike. In November, the regiment received a special assignment to support the Soviet offensive on Nalchik. The operation required maximum effort. The pilots made up to 18 sorties per night, practically without leaving their cockpits. Technicians hung bombs on the fly and refueled the tanks while the engines were still running. The results exceeded all expectations. In 3 nights of intense action, the regiment destroyed 6 ammunition depots, 4 fuel depots, and 2 mountain river crossings. The German offensive faltered due to a lack of supplies. The enemy made desperate attempts to stop the nightwitches. Additional anti-aircraft batteries were brought into the mountains. German fighters patrolled the skies in hopes of intercepting Soviet aircraft. But the pilots learned to use every fold of the terrain and every shadow cast by the rocks. Precise reconnaissance played a special role in the Caucasus operations. The girls studied every gorge and every path in the combat zone. They drew up detailed maps of German positions and identified weak points in the enemy's defenses. This information was invaluable to the front command. By the winter of 1942, the regiment had earned the respect not only of the enemy, but also of its allies. Commanders of other units specifically requested the support of the nightwitches for their operations. The girls became welcome guests on any section of the front. The Battle of the Caucasus showed that a small women's regiment could influence the course of a major operation. The nightwitches proved that in modern warfare, it is not only brute force that is important, but also precision, surprise, and tactical skill. Their moment of glory was yet to come. The winter of 1942 to 1943 brought decisive events. The Red Army seized the initiative, and the liberation of the occupied territories began. The nightwitches participated in operations to liberate the Kuban and Taman peninsulas, operations that brought the regiment its first serious awards. The Kuban was home to many of the female pilots, including the regiment's commander, Bershanskaya. The girls fought for their native land with particular ferocity. Every liberated farmstead and every village became a personal victory for the Kuban Cossacks in their flight helmets. The operation began in February 1943. The Germans had turned the Taman Peninsula into a powerful fortified area. They hoped to hold these positions as a springboard for a new offensive in the Caucasus. The Soviet command decided to drive the enemy out of this strategically important area. The nightwitches were tasked with suppressing German artillery and disrupting enemy supply lines. The peninsula was crisscrossed by ravines and gullies, creating ideal conditions for light bombers. The Po-2s could approach their targets unnoticed, using the terrain to their advantage. The strikes on railway junctions were particularly successful. The Germans were delivering shells and food supplies via the only line connecting the Taman Peninsula with their main forces. The female pilots methodically destroyed this communication line, forcing the enemy to expend enormous resources on repair work. In March, the regiment carried out a series of brilliant operations against German batteries near Novorossiysk. The Nazis had installed heavy guns in concrete shelters, believing them to be invulnerable to aircraft. But the nightwitches found a weak spot: the embrasures for firing. With precise strikes, they put several batteries out of action. The enemy fought back fiercely. Messerschmitt 110 night fighters equipped with radar were deployed to the combat zone. These aircraft were specifically designed to hunt Soviet light bombers. Several Po-2s were shot down, and the girls suffered serious losses for the first time. But the pilots quickly found a solution. They began flying in pairs, covering each other. Experienced pilots taught the young girls air combat techniques in slow-moving aircraft. The main thing was not speed, but maneuverability and surprise. By the summer of 1943, the Taman Peninsula was completely liberated. For its participation in this operation, the 588th Regiment was given the honorary name Taman. This was the first official award recognizing the merits of the nightwitches at the state level. The operation in the Kuban showed the increased skill of the female pilots. They learned to operate in all conditions, from the steppes to the swamps, from the sea coast to the mountain gorges. Each girl became a universal soldier, capable of solving any combat task. Many female pilots paid with their lives for the liberation of their homeland, but their sacrifice was not in vain. Kuban became free, and the Taman Night Witches wrote a new glorious page in the history of the regiment. New battles and new victories awaited them ahead. In the spring of 1944, one of the largest operations of the Night Witches began: the liberation of Crimea. The peninsula was turned into a powerful fortress, which the Germans called an unsinkable aircraft carrier. The 17th Army of the Wehrmacht took up a deeply echeloned defense, hoping to hold out until reinforcements arrived. The Crimean operation required the pilots to master new tactics. The peninsula was densely packed with anti-aircraft artillery and patrolled by fighter planes. Traditional methods of night attacks became more dangerous. New approaches to the targets had to be found. The Night Witches found an original solution. They began to use sea fog, which often covered the Crimean coast. In the thick fog, the Po-2s became completely invisible. The pilots learned to navigate by the sound of the surf and the outline of the coastline. Strikes on the ports of Sevastopol and Yalta proved particularly effective. The Germans had concentrated their main supply depots there, hoping for protection from powerful coastal batteries. But the pilots approached from the sea, where they were not expected. With precise strikes, they destroyed several important targets. In April, the regiment was given a super tough job: to support the assault on Sapun Mountain. This hill controlled the approaches to Sevastopol and had been turned into an impregnable fortress by the Germans. The multi-layered system of trenches, pillboxes, and dugouts seemed invulnerable to light bombers. The female pilots developed a carousel tactic. The planes flew toward the target in a single column, but attacked from different directions. While the first group dropped their bombs, the second approached from the flank, and the third from the rear. The German anti-aircraft gunners did not have time to re-aim their guns. The pilot Evdokia Bershanskaya played a special role in the Crimean battles. During one of her sorties, her plane was hit by anti-aircraft fire. The plane caught fire, but Bershanskaya managed to reach her target and accurately drop her bombs on a German command post. Only after completing her mission did she make an emergency landing. May 1944 brought the long-awaited victory. Crimea was completely liberated. For its participation in this operation, the regiment was awarded the Order of the Red Banner, the highest collective award. Many female pilots were nominated for state awards. The Crimean operation showed that the Night Witches were capable of operating in any conditions. Mountains, steppes, sea coast, everywhere the female pilots found ways to effectively strike the enemy. Their tactical skills reached perfection. The enemy was forced to acknowledge the professionalism of the Soviet female pilots. Captured German documents contained detailed instructions on how to fight the Night Witches. The enemy studied their tactics and tried to find a countermeasure, but the girls were always one step ahead. The liberation of Crimea was a turning point in the war in the south. The Germans lost their most important strategic foothold. The Night Witches made a significant contribution to this victory, proving that a small but well-trained unit can accomplish tasks of strategic importance. In 2 years of war, the regiment became an elite unit. Each pilot became an ace of night combat. New battles awaited them on the road to Berlin. The summer of 1944 was marked by the grand Operation Bagration, the liberation of Belarus. This offensive became one of the most successful in the history of the Red Army. In just a few weeks, entire German armies were defeated. The nightwitches participated in this operation from the very beginning. The Belarusian forests and swamps created special conditions for light aviation. The dense vegetation hid German positions from daytime reconnaissance. Only at night, when the enemy lit fires and turned on their lights, could their location be detected. This was the element of the nightwitches. The regiment was tasked with disrupting the supply lines of the German Army Group Center. The Nazis had created an extensive network of communications along forest roads. These routes were almost invulnerable to heavy aircraft, as the trees prevented them from taking aim. But the Po-2s could attack specific targets from a minimum altitude. Strikes on bridges across numerous Belarusian rivers proved particularly effective. The pilots learned to find crossings even in dense forests. They navigated by clearings, by the glint of water in the moonlight, and by the movement of car headlights. The main offensive began in June. The nightwitches worked closely with the partisans. The underground fighters passed on the coordinates of important targets, and the pilots delivered precise strikes. This cooperation yielded excellent results. Pilot Nadezhda Popova carried out one of the most daring raids of the war during those days. Having received information about a German headquarters in a forest estate, she single-handedly attacked the heavily guarded facility. A precisely dropped bomb destroyed the building along with important documents and officers. The German retreat turned into a rout. The roads were jammed with columns of retreating troops. For the nightwitches, it was a field day. The concentrations of equipment became ideal targets. The pilots made up to 20 sorties per night, methodically destroying enemy columns. Strikes on railway junctions played a special role. The Germans tried to transport valuable equipment and troops by rail. But the pilots constantly destroyed the tracks, forcing the enemy to abandon their equipment and retreat on foot. By the beginning of August, Belarus was completely liberated. Operation Bagration ended in a brilliant victory. Army Group Center practically ceased to exist. The nightwitches also played their part in this success. Many female pilots received high awards for their participation in the Belarusian operation. The regiment demonstrated its ability to operate in any geographical conditions. Swamps and forests were no obstacle for the girls in their light aircraft. The Belarusian operation demonstrated new possibilities for the tactics of the nightwitches. Interaction with partisans, precision strikes on communications, support for advancing troops. The regiment's arsenal was constantly expanding. The road to the west lay ahead. The Red Army was approaching the borders of Germany. The nightwitches were preparing for new battles and new victories. Their combat skills had reached perfection, and their fame resounded across the entire front. The enemy was forced to admit that there was no effective defense against the nightwitches. The girls in their outdated planes became a symbol of the inevitability of retribution. Every night brought new blows to the retreating invaders. In the fall of 1944, the nightwitches crossed the border of the USSR and entered Polish territory. It was a symbolic moment. Soviet troops had begun the liberation of Europe from fascist oppression. The pilots understood the historical significance of the moment and prepared to fight on foreign soil with a special sense of responsibility. The Polish theater of war was different from all previous ones. There were no familiar steppes or forests here. The densely populated area with many cities required particular precision in striking. Casualties among the civilian population could not be allowed. The first major operation was the liberation of Lublin. The Germans had turned the city into a fortified area, intending to hold back the Soviet advance. The nightwitches were tasked with suppressing pockets of resistance within the city limits. Urban combat required precision. The pilots studied city maps, determined the location of German positions, and calculated flight paths between buildings. Any mistake could lead to tragedy. The strikes on the bridges across the Vistula were particularly difficult. The Germans had mined the crossings, preparing to blow them up during their retreat. The explosives had to be destroyed with precision strikes without damaging the bridges themselves. The pilots coped with this task brilliantly. In December, the regiment took part in the operation to liberate Krakow. The ancient city with its historical monuments required a particularly delicate approach. The Germans had positioned their forces among architectural masterpieces, counting on the Russians not daring to bomb them. The female pilots found an original solution. They began to use low-power incendiary bombs that only affected enemy personnel without destroying buildings. This tactic made it possible to clear the city of the enemy while preserving its cultural treasures. Cooperation with Polish patriots played a special role in the Polish operations. The Home Army passed valuable intelligence to the Soviet pilots. The Poles indicated the locations of German headquarters, warehouses, and communication centers. In January 1945, the liberation of Warsaw began. The Polish capital lay in ruins after the uprising and brutal suppression by the Germans. The nightwitches were tasked with supporting the assault on the city while avoiding further destruction. The pilots worked with extreme precision. They only struck confirmed military targets, carefully avoiding residential areas. Each sortie was planned taking into account the location of civilians sheltering in basements. For the liberation of the Polish city of Kevzlin, the regiment received the Order of Suvorov, a rare award usually reserved for generals and marshals. This recognition underscored the outstanding role of the night witches in European operations. The Polish campaign showed a new side to the pilots' skills. They learned to fight in densely built-up areas, among historical monuments, and close to the civilian population. The accuracy of their strikes reached surgical levels. The enemy was forced to acknowledge the changed tactics of the night witches. German reports noted that Russian female pilots had become even more dangerous opponents. They learned how to inflict maximum damage with minimal collateral damage. By February 1945, most of Poland had been liberated. The night witches flew from the Vistula to the Oder, supporting the advance of ground forces. Their contribution to the liberation of the Polish people was invaluable. The regiment earned the gratitude not only of the Soviet command, but also of the Polish government. Warsaw children drew Po-2 aircraft, and girls in flight helmets became heroines of Polish legends. The night witches became a symbol of liberation for all of Eastern Europe. The final goal lay ahead, the lair of the fascist beast. Germany was already close, and the female pilots were preparing for the final battles of the war. Their combat experience, gained over 3 years of fighting, would now be applied on the enemy's own soil. January 1945. The Red Army was preparing for the final decisive blow. Ahead lay the territory of Germany itself, the lair of the fascist beast. The night witches received orders to support the advance on Berlin. This was to be their last and most important operation. German soil met the Soviet pilots with fierce resistance. The enemy fought with the desperation of the doomed. Every city was turned into a fortress, every village into a center of resistance. The Nazis understood that there was nowhere left to retreat. The Po-2 crossed the Reich border near Kustrin. The pilots saw German cities and villages below that had seemed unattainable 3 years earlier. Now the war had come to the aggressor's land. Just retribution had overtaken those who had brought grief to millions of people. The Germans threw everything they had left into the battle. The latest Me-262 jet fighters hunted Soviet aircraft. Anti-aircraft artillery was reinforced to the limit. The sky over Germany turned into a solid field of fire. But the nightwitches were ready for any challenge. In 3 years of war, they had learned to overcome any defense. The experience of thousands of combat sorties made them invincible. Each pilot became an ace of night combat. Particularly, fierce battles unfolded over the crossings across the Oder. The Germans blew up all the bridges, but Soviet troops forced the river using improvised means. The nightwitches covered the crossings, suppressing enemy artillery on the opposite bank. In March, the regiment took part in the assault on Königsberg. The ancient Prussian city had been turned into an impregnable fortress. Powerful forts, built in the 19th century, were supplemented with modern fortifications. It seemed impossible to take the city. The female pilots found a weak spot in the enemy's defenses. There were gaps between the forts, covered only by field fortifications. The Po-2s were able to attack these areas using their low altitude. With precise strikes, they made breaches in the defenses. The storming of Königsberg was a triumph for Soviet weapons. The impregnable fortress fell in 4 days. The night witches played a significant role in this victory. Their night strikes demoralized the defenders, depriving them of sleep and rest. By April, Soviet troops had reached Berlin. The capital of the Reich was preparing for its final battle. Hitler declared the city a fortress and ordered his troops to fight to the last man. For the night witches, the moment of truth had arrived. In the skies above the lair of fascism, they were about to write the final chapter of their combat biography. The girls who had started the war in outdated training planes were to strike a blow at the very heart of the enemy empire. The regiment's combat path was coming to an end. Thousands of kilometers had been covered, hundreds of battles fought, tens of thousands of sorties flown. The night witches proved to the whole world that women are capable of feats unparalleled in history. Berlin was waiting. The last battle of the war was to be the brightest star in the constellation of the night witches' victories. History was preparing to pay tribute to these amazing girls. On May 9, 1945, at 23:01 Berlin time, the Act of Unconditional Surrender of Germany was signed in Karlshorst. The Great Patriotic War was over. The night witches made their last combat flight. 4 years of hell were behind them. During the war, 23 female pilots of the 588th Regiment were awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. This was a record among all female military formations. Each award was paid for with blood. Each medal was a symbol of unyielding courage. Evdokia Bershanskaya was the first hero of the Soviet Union among the night witches. The regiment commander received this highest award for outstanding leadership in combat operations. Under her command, The regiment flew more than 24,000 combat missions, an absolute record for light aviation. Nadezhda Popova, one of the most successful pilots, flew 942 combat missions. Her plane returned 42 times with bullet holes from enemy fire. Popova shot down 3 German fighters in aerial combat, a unique feat for a light bomber pilot. Ekaterina Ryabova flew 817 combat missions. She was shot down 5 times, but always returned to duty. In one battle, Ryabova landed a burning plane in enemy territory, carried a wounded navigator out of the fire, and then spent 2 weeks making her way through German-occupied territory to reach her own lines. Larisa Rozanova was posthumously awarded the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. During a raid on German positions, her plane was hit by anti-aircraft fire. Rozanova could have ejected, but she brought the plane to its target and dropped the bombs accurately. The explosion destroyed the German headquarters along with the heroine's plane. The feat of Maria Smirnova deserves special mention. On the night of February 23, 1944, her plane was attacked by a German fighter. Smirnova managed to escape pursuit, complete her combat mission, and bring her damaged aircraft back to base. For this flight, she was awarded the Order of Lenin. Those who provided support from the ground have not been forgotten either. Engineer Marina Raskova headed the regiment's technical service. Under her leadership, female mechanics serviced the planes in all weather conditions, often under enemy fire. The flawless work of the technicians largely determined the success of the Night Witches. Navigator Yevgenia Zhigulenko flew more than 800 combat missions. Her navigational skills were legendary. She could guide a plane to its target in any weather conditions. The Germans called Zhigulenko the Witch Navigator because her calculations were so accurate. Many female pilots were awarded several times. The Order of the Red Banner, the Order of Alexander Nevsky, and the Order of the Patriotic War became familiar to the girls of the Duncan Regiment. Each medal told the story of a specific feat, a specific flight. During the 4 years of the war, the regiment lost 32 aircraft and 37 people were killed. These losses were relatively small for an aviation unit, which spoke to the high skill of the pilots and the correctness of the tactics chosen. The Night Witches proved to the whole world that women are capable of fighting on equal terms with men. Their feat inspired millions of people and set an example of courage and self-sacrifice. History will remember these amazing girls forever. After the war, many of the awards found their heroines already in peacetime. Some pilots continued their service in aviation. Others became teachers, doctors, and engineers. But all of them remained Night Witches forever, a symbol of female courage in the most terrible war in human history. Victory came at a high price, but the Night Witches made an invaluable contribution to the defeat of fascism. During the 4 years of the war, the 588th Night Bomber Aviation Regiment flew 24,000 combat missions. This is an absolute record among all aviation units of the Great Patriotic War. The statistics speak for themselves. The Night Witches dropped more than 3,000 tons of bombs on the enemy. They destroyed 17 bridges, 9 railway trains, 2 railway junctions, 26 warehouses with fuel and ammunition, 12 fuel tanks, 76 vehicles, 86 firing points, and 11 searchlights. But numbers cannot convey the main thing: the moral impact on the enemy. The Night Witches deprived German soldiers of peace, sleep, and confidence in the future. The psychological effect of their actions far exceeded the material damage. After the war, many German generals admitted that Soviet female pilots were one of the most unpleasant surprises on the Eastern Front. The German command was never able to find an effective countermeasure against the tactics of the nightwitches. The uniqueness of the regiment lay not only in the fact that it was female. Most importantly, the pilots proved the effectiveness of unconventional methods of warfare. They showed that in modern conflict, it is not only the power of weapons that is important, but also tactical skill, ingenuity, and the ability to improvise. The experience of the nightwitches was carefully studied in the post-war years. The tactic of small groups of light aircraft operating covertly at night was used in many local conflicts. The principles developed by Soviet female pilots are still used in aviation today. International recognition did not come immediately. During the Cold War, the West preferred not to remember the exploits of Soviet soldiers, but justice prevailed. Today, the nightwitches are known all over the world. Their story has been translated into dozens of languages, films have been made about them, and books have been written. In 1995, on the 50th anniversary of Victory Day, a monument to the nightwitches was unveiled in Engels, where their combat career began. The names of all the regiment's pilots, both heroes and ordinary participants in the war, are engraved on the granite. Many countries around the world have established awards in honor of Soviet female pilots. France awarded several nightwitches the Order of the Legion of Honor. Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia recognized their contribution to the liberation of Europe with their own awards. The most important legacy of the nightwitches is that they showed that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary feats. Girls from small towns and villages became legends of world aviation. They proved that anyone can be a hero if their country needs them. Modern Russian aviation honors the memory of the nightwitches. The traditions of the regiment are continued by female pilots in the modern Air Force. New generations of defenders of the fatherland are being raised on the history of the 588th Regiment. In the 2000s, work began to restore the regiment's complete history. Enthusiasts are searching for documents, recording the memories of surviving veterans, and reconstructing the combat path of each crew. This work allows the memory of their feat to be preserved for future generations. The nightwitches will forever remain a symbol of courage, self-sacrifice, and loyalty to duty. Their feat is a lesson from history that must not be forgotten. In a world where the forces of evil are once again rearing their ugly head, the example set by these amazing women is particularly relevant. The memory of the nightwitches will live on forever. As long as aviation exists and people remember the war, the names of Raskova, Bershanskaya, and Popova will be spoken with reverence. They showed the whole world that the sky can belong to those who are ready to fight for it.